Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Smoko Podcast. My name is Alexis Armstrong, your host. Nice to meet you. The Smoko Podcast is a place to celebrate and highlight women, trans women, and non-binary folk working within STEM and trade occupations. So please tune in, take a break, join us. We are on Smoko. Today, we are extremely lucky to be joined by the lovely Ayesha Wilson, who is an electrical engineer and open source hardware maker. And her background is in electrical engineering with a bachelor's of science to prove it, and then a master's of science in electrical engineering as well. And in her master's, she specialized in circuit design, which included analog, mixed signal, and RF circuits. And then she did a minor in embedded systems. And I don't know what any of those things mean. So I can't wait to learn more about her specialty in circuit design and her specialty in electronic engineering. And we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about her experience because she moved from India to the United States for her school and now for her career in electronic engineering. So we're going to talk about that experience. We're going to talk about her projects working in clean technology, her experience working in STEM volunteering and mentorship. We're also going to talk about roller skating and her love of roller skating. It's going to be all-encompassing conversation. We're going to talk about open source hardware, what that means, her experience as a maker because she's an avid maker of things. So I just can't wait to learn more. I don't know about anything about this space or have a background in it. So I can't wait to talk to you and to learn more. And just thank you so much for coming onto the show.
Thank you for having me. I love your show and I'm so excited to see all the people you've had so far. So I feel very honored to be in that group.
Oh my goodness, that's the biggest compliment I could ever receive. It's an
Aw.
absolute honor to have you on the show and just thank you so much. It means the world to me. So I'm so excited.
Yeah, me too. Because you said you don't know anything about circuits. I think that you know because you use them every day.
I'm excited to learn like what I use every day because maybe that's it. When someone says circuits and circuit design, I'm also, as a heads up, I am going to say circus. I have tried to say circuits all day and I keep on saying circus design. So that's definitely going to come out at least like once on this episode. But I think when you think of that, like I just don't really know what to picture. And maybe that's where we can start is just how did you discover it? Like, how did you know that you were like, okay, electrical engineering, that's what I love to do. I love this thing called circuit design. I think embedded systems are the coolest systems that have ever existed. How did that happen? And how did that draw of that specialty lead you? Because it led you to the United States and it also led you to a master's and to now this wonderful career in electrical engineering. So, how did that happen?
It was a very long and winded road. So I didn't really have too many role models growing up who were doing STEM careers because I grew up in India in a small town. It was like a fairly conservative family where most women didn't have careers. But I always was fascinated by physics ever since I learned about it in middle school. I remember they taught us like magnetism and electromagnetism, and I thought that was the coolest thing. It was like better than a fairy tale. It was like magic happening. It was so cool. So I got really interested in that and a little bit like, so Kalpana Chawla, she was the first Indian woman to go into space. And I learned about her and I thought that was so cool. And I wanted to go to space because I was like, why not?
Yeah.
You're at that age where everyone's asking what you want to be when you grow up. And I was like, I want to go to space because why not? So I used to say I want to be an astronaut, but I was like super interested in physics. And then my sister told me that you can talk to astronauts in space using ham radio. It's like an amateur radio thing, which I thought was so cool. But you have to write an exam for that, which is a lot about like circuits and how like the circuits and electronics work in radios, which I started looking into, and it was just like went over my head because I was still in middle school. But that kind of sparked an interest to learn more about that. So that kind of started my journey towards learning about circuits. It took a lot of years and serious education to finally get there, but that's how it sparked an interest.
Oh my goodness, that's such a beautiful story. And like, I feel like that could be like a PBS special. That love of seeing that role model and seeing her and being like, okay, she was the first Indian woman in space and like having that appreciation for her to be like, I'm going to become her. I'm going to space too. And that kind of like convoluted story of your sister then coming in and being another role model and this like beautiful protagonist in the story too, to be like, you could talk to every other radio. You just have to figure out how the radio works. And that led you to circuit design. When you started Looking at your first radio system, was there a moment that you're like, oh my goodness, this is like what I learned back in middle school? This is the magic, and this is basically what first interested me? Or was it still, did it take a little bit of time? Or as soon as you saw your first circuit and your first radio, you were like, yep, that's it. I want to make that.
Yeah, no, I'm still so fascinated by magnets, and there's so much electromagnetism in general in circuitry because when there's current, there's a magnetic field around it.
Okay.
So my brain is still blown away by that, which I still can't get over that. But more I learned about circuits, it took a while to like fully understand it. It's interesting because it's just like a bunch of little components that each have a specific role or a trait that they have, but they also have a weakness. In my head, it's like Pokemon, like a Pokemon
card. Like, yeah, strength 10 minus like can't go in water. Okay, that's really cool and nerdy. I love that.
So they all like kind of work together to serve like a mission. They're LEDs that can glow, but they can't take too much current. So you put a resistor to make sure it gets enough current. Then there's a battery. There's just like all these components, and learning about them was very fascinating.
You're making it sound so fascinating. It almost sounds like a recipe, like making like a cake or making bread. It sounds like every kind of thing has its one little component and it does a certain job. And if you want it to do this as its end goal, that you have to add another component to add that. When we're looking at like kind of circuits, is there different types? I know your thesis focused on 3 different types. I think it was like analog, RF, one was like open circuits. Are those for different use cases, or are they complete different components or set of components, different set of Pokemons? And then is that the same thing as open source hardware? Is that the same as circuit, or is that a complete different beast if that's like magic cards instead of Pokemon cards?
They're all related. And I loved your example of the recipe. That's such a good example to explain this. So that was amazing. They're related. So like the basic components are about the same. So analog circuits are just signals in nature. They're not zeros and ones, right? They can be anything. So that's where analog circuits come in, that they don't have to be a 0 or a 1 to read it. So digital circuits that came into place when we started doing more computers and computing on circuits, not just taking raw signals and amplifying them or doing anything with raw signals. So this was more for computing. We started making digital circuits. So that's where memories come from, like memory chips and computers. That's the beginning of all that.
The brain of a computer kind of comes from,
Yeah, that's to make the computer work better. We change those analog signals into ones and zeros to make it easier for the computer. That's digital circuits, and RF is basically like high frequency signals. So because we want to communicate things very fast when they're computers, we started making circuits to help that. So we can Bluetooth signals and Ethernet, like internet, all those signals, they are high speed signals. So like the components have to be changed a little bit because they respond differently if it's high frequency, because they're oscillating so fast, and anytime there's current, it creates magnetic field and they just go crazy. So you have to stabilize them a little bit.
And then open source hardware, is that just a bunch of circuits all together? Is that a type or like use case?
So open source generally means mostly when people make discoveries or do anything, they patent because they don't want to share it. They don't want other people to capitalize on their findings. So open source is the opposite of that. It's to share more openly, to not put patents, to not hide away inventions. So it promotes education and collaboration, which mostly companies and like schools or anyone don't do. So this whole movement of open source stemmed from, let's not do that. Let's share things to make things accessible for everyone. I was drawn to it because it promotes education, first of all. There's so much gatekeeping in engineering. You have to go to school to learn. There's a lot of money you have to spend. And then getting mentorship, especially for like minority groups, it's so hard. So that becomes another barrier. So I love that people decided to share designs and to teach and to make it more collaborative. So my effort into it is to make hobby projects on my own that's not associated to anyone and share that so people can learn from that.
Oh, okay. That's where the open source is. Thank you so much for defining all of those things and kind
Yeah,
of
no.
step by step, because I think it's all new terminology and new to us. But you're right. Like you said right off the get go at this interview, that you're like, you know what a circuit is because it's in everything that you use. And I didn't realize that. I didn't realize how many things use circuits and how it's such a integral part of everyday life. I love that idea of moving from maybe a patented or like a controlled engineering for profit of this is what a hardware looks like, or this is what like this type of circuit does. Now we can make it open for the public. I think that's so beautiful. And I'm sure you resonate with that as well from your background of being like, yeah, I grew up in like a small town where it was traditional. We didn't really have access to this. As a young girl, I couldn't imagine all of a sudden just going on the internet and being like, okay, Ayesha, she made this wonderful circuit and now I'm going to follow her instructions and I'm going to be able to create this for free by myself. That's amazing.
I love, like, from the open source community, one thing that I've come to see is a lot of women, adult women who never got to learn anything about circuits are finding use cases for it, because especially people who are artists and crafters, they're finding ways to add LEDs into their jewelry or whatever. I love seeing like that use case for it, and for them to still get an option to learn and be a part of making and engineering.
Oh my goodness. I'd love that they all of a sudden get to have that part of that community and like to see things being used in a different way and just for like crafty way. When we're talking about like open source hardware, if I know we're going to talk about it a little bit later as well, but when we're talking about that, if someone's listening right now and they're like, oh my God, I want to get into that. I'm a crafty girl. I want to put some cool LEDs. What would you need as like a bench top ready? Do you need like a Raspberry Pi system? Do you need soldering capability? What goes into creating hardware?
This is again the beauty of like open source, because there are people who've gone through these iterations of not having access to those things. First thing that comes out of my mind, there's a company called Chibitronics, and I partner with them sometimes for my projects. They make like sticker LEDs and sticker components. So you can just do like paper crafts and stick them, and there's like copper tape that you can stick to a battery. So you don't need anything. You can just buy their kit and play around with that. So there's that you can do if you do want to make something. Oh, there's sewable stuff too. They make a thread that's conductive, so you can stitch LEDs and make all sorts of fun wearable electronics. So that's a great way to start. But you can get a soldering iron, get components, and start making real circuits that are a little more traditional. And then if you want to program it, you can do Arduino or Raspberry Pi.
Okay.
So that'll make it a little bit more like you can do blinking sequences, or you can take sensor data, which is a whole new world to explore.
I played with a Raspberry Pi once and all of the little sensors and stuff, and it was just so cool how powerful it was and just how simple it was, that it was like it could be explained to kind of anyone without that background to be like, yeah, you just created something that beeps when you like put your hand beside it. Maybe something rudimentary, but it was just the feeling of being like, oh my God, I created that was really cool. And I love that this community exists and that this push towards open source exists. I think that's really beautiful. I love
it. And see, you know circuits. You already work with Raspberry Pi. You're an expert.
Well, I didn't really know what like circuits mean. And maybe if like if we've talked about circuits and have mentioned it, but maybe we haven't like dug in enough. Like, how would you define a circuit? Would you basically, is it just something that moves a signal from point A to point B to make an end goal? Is that the main drive of a circuit? If someone, I don't want someone to leave this episode to be like, I still have no idea what a circuit is, but I know you said it 100 times.
Yeah, so I guess the technical term for a circuit is just a path for a current. So as soon as you make a complete path for a current to flow, that makes a circuit. So an open circuit is, just imagine there's battery, a switch, and an LED. So when the switch is open, there's no path for the current to be flowing. So that's an open circuit, and then you close the switch and there's a path for the current that makes it a closed circuit. So it's just a path, like everything is just current flowing through different components, and the different components just do their own magic.
I love it. They do their own magic. They have their own electromagnetic. They nerd you out. You get into it. I absolutely love it. And I think that's a wonderful definition. And thank you, because now everyone who's listening will be like, yes, I know what a circuit is. It has been explained. When I was researching you, it was just such a joy. And like one thing that stood out that I didn't even think is the idea of electrical engineering in terms of clean technology and robotics and automation. And I was wondering if you could maybe talk about some of these projects that you've been on. One of them that I was reading was your work in new agriculture and this kind of sustainable movement in agriculture and making these robots that aided for hydroponics. Could you speak to maybe some of your favorite clean tech projects? And then what would be your role and responsibility of that project? What did you do when you worked in that initiative?
So all my jobs so far have been in clean tech.
So cool.
Yeah, I'm so happy that I found that, because climate anxiety would cripple me otherwise. So I'm happy that I get to do something, even if it amounts to nothing in the end. It just helps me to move in that direction. Some of the things I worked on, I made sensors for industrial dishwashers that are in commercial kitchens. So they monitor water consumption and dishwashers and then power consumption. And it's more data for the restaurant to know what's going on. But also, like, it helps when something's broken, it helps them identify what's broken. And so they're not consuming too much water just because something's broken. So that was one of my first jobs and projects. So I really enjoyed that. And then I worked for Ryobi. I don't know if you've heard of Ryobi. It's like a power tool company.
Yes.
So they traditionally made power tools. So I joined their effort into electrifying them. So instead of having gas power, it's all battery powered and like more efficient motors. It was really interesting to me because in India, we don't really have lawns or like lawnmowers. And then I came and started working on lawnmowers. So, and
like,
it's
what
such
is
a big,
this?
Cool. Every household in the US at least has done like to help them move in a direction that's a cleaner energy. So that was cool. And like some of the skills that I learned there, I could use it towards robotics because it was motors and batteries and sensors. So that's how I got into the strawberry robotics startup. You mentioned that like it's hydroponic strawberry farms and there's a labor shortage right now. So it's more to assist the farmers to just harvest fruit. So some of the cool things of that is that since it uses machine vision, they do a better job of picking the strawberry at the right time. So it's not wasted necessarily. I like that a lot. And then we started getting into UV disinfection, which I thought was really cool because that means like we won't be using pesticides, and UV disinfection is better for the soil and like for the environment in general. That was like a side project I did with that company. That was really neat.
So cool. What does that even mean? All of these projects, are so cool. And I think that's why it was such a joy that you've worked in like clean technology. And I think I will combat, the only thing that I will combat is when we first started talking about this answer and you're like, it's not going to amount to anything. I disagree with that completely. I think this move towards clean technology, and maybe it might be a sensor, or it might like help with one component in one system, but it has a big impact to climate, like water waste or food waste. It has a huge impact. Everything kind of builds. And those are industries that have a lot of greenhouse gas emission and a lot of energy consumption. It's really important to have clean technology and be able to use these robotics and automation. I think all of these projects are so cool. What the hell is UV sensing? That sounds so cool.
Yeah, so it's UV, like ultraviolet light rays in the spectrum of like light. We have infrared, then we have all the colors. That's the visible spectrum. And then there's the ultraviolet band, which is what like we get from the sun, which can damage our skin and all that. They've found that a very specific nanometer range of that can. So we're just basically dosing the plants for that particular frequency to kill the pests. So we don't have to do chemical pesticides.
Oh my goodness. How would that work when you were designing these kind of robotic systems and circuits? Would you be in a lab kind of drafting them and prototyping? Did you get to be able to see to be like, yep, that's my robot. I gave that little robot a brain and he's now zapping strawberries with UV light. Like, how did that work, that progression?
Yeah, so when I joined that company, it's a startup. So
Mm,
there was one set of robots that they'd already made. So I was in the part where we were starting a new fleet design.
okay.
Designed a lot of their circuit boards and was helping with the architecture of the robot to make some of the communication faster and a little more reliable part of
Mhm.
making that robot. And then I went into integration, like designing and then helping to integrate and bring up that robot. So it
Cool.
just came from like a concept to this whole thing.
That's
And then like we
awesome.
took it out to field trials and made sure it works. So it's funny that you said this is the robot I put a brain on or whatever, because we have a fake strawberry grow
Mm.
in the company, and I'd seen it do its job with the fake strawberry so many times. But the first time I saw it actually pick a robot, I mean, sorry, a strawberry in the field, I like freaked out.
Yeah,
I was like, it actually works. I didn't
100%.
expect that.
It's like putting your child to school, basically. Like the fact that you came in at that like perfect new generation and being able to see it from like building blocks to then like blossom, like I probably would have
Yeah,
cried. I'm sure
yeah.
like
I cried.
yeah. I would have too. I would have been like so emotional, all of your work going into it. And
Yeah.
that's so cool. Did you know like that was a possibility? Like when you went in school, I guess from an outsider, I didn't even know that this tech existed or that this was like a
Hmm.
huge push or this is when we're talking about moving to clean technology, this is what we're talking about. This is like the foundation. I didn't even really know that this part existed. At school, were you taught that this is your kingdom and you can work in any single industry? Does all industries have this push to automation, or there's some industries that are still in the stone ages that you're like, we need to move to like an electrical engineer needs to get their stat and we need to move to robotics and automation?
I think there are a lot of industries still that can be updated, even if it's not hardware, just like software wise, they can benefit, but there's definitely a lot of scope to bring them to the digital age. There's so many spaces that can still move towards clean tech if they put the effort towards it. But to answer to your previous question, I didn't know I would get into this in school because I was just exposed to consumer electronics. So I always
Okay.
thought that's the only path forward. I was excited to make circuits, but I wasn't particularly excited about like just selling more phones. So I was really excited when I found this, my first job of like making the sensors for the dishwashers, because on the surface it didn't seem very exciting, but I liked that it was towards something positive, and that led like from one thing it led to the other.
And when we're talking about consumer electronics that you mentioned, is that
Mhm.
creating the components within a system that you would then purchase? Is that kind of that idea?
So
Okay.
it's just whatever people can sell directly or companies can sell directly to people who are
Okay.
the consumers, which is like at a large scale. And I guess Ryobi is technically consumer electronic. Their division was trying to electrify it, and that's one of the industries that
Yeah.
they could have chosen not to and still made gas powered tools. But the fact that they're doing that is they're
Mhm.
moving in the right direction.
Yeah, and have that initiative of clean tech. I love that you ended up in clean tech too, because I do think that consumer electronics, there's no shade there, but I feel like it would be a
Yeah.
little bit like stagnant or it wouldn't be as interesting or as dynamic. It sounds like
Hmm.
this kind of space you could do whatever you want with it and that it's constantly changing and new. Is there something that you're really passionate in this space that you're like, this is my be all end all project? Like, I really want to work on this one system or this one sector? Or is there anything
Hmm.
that really excites you in the space of clean technology?
Yeah, I'm just interested in applications. So my
Mm.
current job right now is electrifying RVs, like
Oh,
the RV trailers,
cool.
because they traditionally have generators. There's so many problems with that. It's not the cleanest fuel. And then when you're in campsites where it's quiet and there's wildlife and it's supposed to be there, you hear the generator. Yeah. So this effort helps in taking away that noise pollution and then the
Mm.
air pollution because of the fuel, and then just helps like the electric vehicles in general to give them more towing power and range, which which is really cool. So it's all solar panels on the top and battery
Cool.
powered. So a lot of people park their RVs at home, so it gives them the opportunity to even charge other electronics. It's such an interesting problem, and it's like the first time people are trying to attempt to make this. So for me, like the application side is so interesting to find all these like industries and like things that people do. Like IVs was another thing that I never thought of because I've never been in an RV before. So I didn't even know that was a problem. This is something that people consume. There's a path to make this a little more efficient. That's exciting to me.
Not only efficient, but clean and better and sustainable, because that has a big footprint. Like you see in camping sites, all of the RVs, they're definitely very loud. My next question literally was going to be like, have you ever been in an RV? And as like homework, did you go spend the night in an RV to be like, oh my goodness, this is what it's like. This is the experience.
No, I hadn't been in an RV before. So the first time I saw was like the prototype RV that we built at the company that I work for. We are called Lightship. It's really cool because it kind of looks like a spaceship. I didn't have a point of reference because it was so like very well designed and like very advanced. Like it has LEDs and like nice interiors. So I think I'll be spoiled. I think I might be sad if I go in a real RV.
I think so too. I don't think you should actually, scratch that. Never go into a real RV. Stay in your like beautiful Miss Frizzle. It almost sounds like a back to school bus. It just sounds fantastic. And that's lovely. That's your first experience of a bougie RV.
But I do want to take an RV trip because I want to see what people like. Why do people take RV trips and like experience that? I think that'll be interesting to just see the use case of it.
To be like, what is this freaking hullabaloo? Honestly, I kind of love them, but I think I'm like biased because I think in Canada, especially where I'm from in the West Coast, everyone RVs. Like all of the photos of my grandfather is just him and his RV and a fish. Like that's every single photo that's ever been taken of him. He just lived in the woods all summer with his fish. So I have a soft spot for them. I really do like them. I don't like the big monsters. I like the kind of like old school hippie vans that are, those are my favorite RVs. But please, I think you should go do it. It's a lot of fun. You just go in the woods.
Make sure I go fishing or something for your grandfather.
Yeah, please. Honestly, take a photo of you with a dead fish and sitting next to your beautiful RV.
That's so funny. I'll do it.
Okay, thank you. I'll hold you to it. And this next one, it's going to be a little bit of a break from dead fish and RV. It's going to be a little bit different. But I was wondering if we could talk again and bring it back to open source hardware, because you're an avid maker. But it comes from this place of kind of bringing that next generation and people who don't have access to this type of technology or this type of education, and bringing engineering kind of accessible. Is there anything that you're working on right now that you're like really passionate about, or there's like a type of project that you're working on? And then what about open source projects, what brings you the most joy that you're like, yes? Is it having someone like message you to be like, I used that, or like seeing photos of it? What's the process there?
So a couple of things I'm working on. That I always have a running list of things I want to make, and the list keeps going, but I can't catch up to it. I like to make wearables, so like a lot of jewelry, inspired circuits that are smaller. So I've been trying to use more sensors. So as an example, like UV sensor, because we need to put sunscreen when the UV index is whatever. I want to make a little pendant or something that basically shows you what the index is, like just a color or whatever, just so you know. That's some of the projects I want to work on.
That's like the nerdiest mood ring I have ever heard. It basically is like a wearable UV mood ring. That's so useful though, to be like, oh my goodness, it's like this and I now need to put on more sunscreen. That's so cool. That's wearable. Is your main focus on wearables, or do you do other things as well? Or is it all jewelry and pretty? Is that the main focus, or is there other things as well?
I like making wearables a lot because I like jewelry too, but I don't always find like the jewelry I like. So I like making handmade jewelry.
Cute.
I just still wearables. I like putting things on clothes, like just lighting up. like skirts or whatever. That's
Fun.
another thing I like to do. There's so many random problems that I have in life that I can solve if I just sit and make something. So there's a tap in my house that it's hard to push it all the way down. So
Mm.
sometimes I leave it on and it starts dripping. So I just want to make something that will like alarm or something if I leave it on. So those are like the running list problems that I have that I just want to make it, but I don't have time.
Oh, I love that honey-do list of customized to your house. At Christmas time or like holiday time in your family, does everybody get like a customized wearable or customized open source hardware project that they're like, okay, thank you. This is like an alarm clock for me at 2 p.m. for my naps or something very specific?
Not yet, but honestly, it's funny you mentioned that because I was actually thinking of doing that this year. The most I've done is 3D print stuff for
Mm.
people. There was one Christmas where all our nieces and nephews got 3D printed stuff and they loved
Aw.
it. It was like we didn't pay anything for it and they had all these expensive toys, but they didn't care for that. They were like so
Yeah.
happy with their customized toys.
Oh, of course. It's like coming from a loved one. It's coming from like their cool auntie to be like, yeah, I made that. And also, what a joy for like young children to have that, but then also to see you as representation to be like, this is what an engineer looks like, and this is what she created for you. Have you taught your nieces and nephew this open source stuff? Have you taught them some projects?
I haven't taught them, but my niece, my sister's daughter, she's really into, I forget what they're called, Kiviko or something. They send like kits, like for kids to make like educational things. So I think some of them were circuits and they like make magnetic circuits that you can just snap in place and they do stuff. So
Cool.
she likes those a lot. So she likes LEDs and she like always shows it to me that she made this like circuit. She's also an engineer, which is
Oh,
cute.
it's so cute. Yeah. I feel like part of you is probably like, oh, yeah, whatever. Like, go to 8 years of school and then we'll talk. But that's so cute. That's so wonderful that she wants to be like you and she's making these LED circuits. What do you think, like, where would you hope open source hardware goes in a perfect future? Do you
Mhm.
think, like, maybe more people would use it, or would it be more use cases? Would it be cheaper to get all of the components? Where would you hope the future of this industry goes?
I hope like more bigger companies and just companies in general adapt it, like it's
Mm.
just the norm and they're not patents and all those things, even though like in a capitalistic society, I don't know if that'll happen.
Yeah, but we can hope.
We can hope. So hope, I guess that's the hope that there are no like gatekeeping and there are no walls for people and everything's just shared more openly. And I definitely think if that happens, there'll be more innovation, like more solutions come out of it. Like if sticker LEDs and sticker circuits was something that no one thought of and it came out of a crafting community need, there's just so many more options out there to do.
Yeah, completely. That's such a good call out because I do think that innovation happens when you least expect it and when you open doors to maybe people that don't have the same mindset or the same training that they look at a problem in the same way that I would look at it, the same way you would look at
Mm-hmm.
it if we all have the same background. And sometimes that just shock of the system to be like, why don't you look at it like backwards and
Yeah.
upside down? And you're like, what? What? It does push you to innovate and discover. I could see that happening.
Yeah, I hope so.
I
And
hope
then
so
like
too.
hopefully it'll drive more clean tech solutions too, because that's a problem that we need to solve. And the more creativity and innovation that happens in that space, it'll be really cool to see like those two communities that I'm part of like come together.
I think too, like when we talked at the very beginning about like maybe some communities or some places that don't have access to this technology, and you were
Mm-hmm.
talking about like gaming circuits to help in your life and to help in your home. How wonderful would it be if those same communities could find like novel solutions that they're dealing with that maybe other people don't know about or other people don't realize that they need that resource or need that solution, right?
Yeah, for sure. And like just materials too, which so much of this is material driven because all the materials that I use in circuits have different properties. So there might be like interesting materials that come out of what different cultures and different places like people use and find new ways of doing things.
I just think it's so wonderful, the idea and the kind of like message behind it and what you're capable of doing. And maybe that'll bring us into the next one, is like focusing on your volunteer work, because you've been part of some really cool organizations, which is NEPRIS, Heart Math Tutor, and then the Sporthy Foundation, where it's all been about like science education, volunteering. I was wondering if you could speak to that experience and what was the most rewarding aspect of volunteering, and is there a lesson or a learning from volunteering and from that work that's really stuck with you that you're like, oh my goodness, that's crazy, that it's going to stay with me forever?
So I started my whole journey into volunteer work. It started in India when I was doing my undergrad there. So one of my friend and I, we were talking about just being interested in doing a little bit more because there are schools in rural parts of India which don't have the same amenities. I grew up in a small town, but we had a lot of amenities compared to them. So we started talking about like how we can help out. And the first thing we did was like to ask all the students if they could donate one book and one pen. And we collected all of that. And so many people, which was amazing because we thought we'll get like a few, but we got way more than we thought. We went and we distributed that to people, and that was really interesting. My friend like really wanted to grow that organization more, and he started doing more work on it. And I started helping him a little bit. One of the things we did was like have people from our college who are interested in different things like programming or gaming or photography.
Cool. Yeah.
Have little workshops for like those kids to show them that these are things that are possible. So I did that and I really enjoyed it. And then I moved here to the US and I found this organization called Heart Math who teaches math to middle school and primary school kids just to tutor them in math. They're mostly like Title I schools. That was really fun for me. I would go like during middle of the work week, which was really interesting to go like from being with adults talking about like engineering problems and going and teaching like addition and multiplication for half an hour with kids.
I couldn't imagine that freeze frame almost of a change in pace. Like, how was that? Was it funny? Was it like entertaining? Was it insightful? How was that whole process of all of a sudden teaching kids math in the middle of the day?
It was refreshing, honestly, because it was just a nice change. And it was like kids are so funny. Like they say the most random things, which was like not what you'd expect. But like sometimes they, because I was teaching math too, it was always fun. Like when they figure things out, and the way like Heart Math had structured, it was more like games that you're playing that were math based. So it was like playful and like kids like once you get they get to know you, they'll like just overshare everything, which was cool. But the other interesting part for me was like, because a lot of these kids, they're not the most privileged kids. They come from homes that are struggling, but they were so aware of some of the things, which was like their emotional intelligence was higher than a lot of adults that I was around.
Yeah.
I remember one of the kids mentioned that he got new shoes, but was so aware of how expensive they were for his mom to buy them. Just the fact that he mentioned that was like just sweet, and like I appreciated that he valued that.
Yeah.
So like that it was a nice experience. Some of the other volunteer work was a little more engineering based, like teaching kids how to program or like showing electronics, those kind of nature. And that always was interesting because first of all you get to see kids who've never been exposed to that career, to show them what it is and to show them that someone like me can be an engineer. But it's also like they get so excited that sometimes like when you do the same thing like day after day, you forget how exciting it is. So seeing that is like gives back energy to go and do that more.
I think that call out of being, it gives you energy and like you forget how exciting it is. I think like you can see it when you teach kids science, that you're like, every single time I've interacted with kids in like education and trying to teach them kind of basics of geology, I always forget to be like, oh my God, that, or I resonate with one kid. There's usually like one feral kid with like hair like crazy and she's covered in paint. I'd be like, oh, that was me. That was you like a long time ago. That's exactly what you were like. And like all of a sudden seeing your younger self almost to be like, okay, that was that discovery, or that's why it was so exciting. And that completely boggled your mind the first time you saw halite and you realized that table saw came from a rock. I remember just being like almost to the point of like anger that I was just like, what? Like, what do you mean? Like, it blew my mind. Seeing kids experience that, there's something about it that's so uplifting and so beautiful. Do you have a favorite kind of program or a favorite subject to teach, or is it all, every single experience has been lovely and rewarding in that?
I like the math tutoring because math is also taught differently here. So that was interesting for me to learn math how it's taught to kids now. So I always had fun doing that, and it's basic math, so it's like not hard for me. I've had some high school programs which have been fun, which is more Arduino programming and blinking lights kind of thing. That's always fun because it's more related to my job and just like getting kids and mostly like girls and non-binary kids to make something for the first time and giving them those tools so they can make more things. That's always fun.
I don't know if you feel the same way, but I think there's something about teaching young kids science that I feel like it builds their confidence really quickly, because I also think that in science and engineering, it's something that's labeled as hard, and it's labeled as like, you have to be a certain level of intellect, or you have to be like a math kid or really good at this really early, that this comes naturally to you. And that wasn't me as a kid. I don't know about you, but I was not.
I wasn't either.
I wasn't a math kid, so I always thought that science wasn't accessible to me. So I always think that it's so beautiful to have that education, to see kids that maybe were like me, that are more like artistic or not labeled science math kid, and then seeing them get it and that confidence build.
I completely agree. Definitely was not that kid either. So we are seeing kids who, for me especially, like a lot of kids who come to these programs are interested in programming. Sometimes they have decided that's what they want to do, but I show them hardware for the first time and they're like, whoa, we didn't even know that this was an option. So that's kind of fun for me too. Or like if someone's like, we didn't even think STEM was interesting, or we're more artsy, or we like arts and crafts more, but showing them you can still use that technology in your arts and crafts.
Yeah, and look at this like necklace that I designed, and like that this is based in science, but it is still arts and crafty. I just think it's so beautiful and so cool. And I'll tag all of those programs that you're working with so people can read up and maybe join them if they would like to, if they're listening and interested in something that's different than science. It's different than arts. It's your love of roller skating. And I wanted to talk about it because all of your content, I love that it's so roller skating heavy. How did that happen? Like, when did you fall in love with roller skating? Did you move to the United States and you were like, this is what everyone does. This is the sport like that I have to do. How do you think that it's similar to your sciences? Do you think it's completely different? Is it like a total escape? What's the draw there in relation to your kind of like day to day?
No, I started skating just a year and a half ago. So I moved to Colorado about 2 years ago, and I just wanted to do something outside more. So I got roller skates because I think I saw someone skating once. I was like, that sounds fun. Let me do that. So it was more like a whim. One thing about me is that I have many interests and hobbies. I pick up things, but nothing usually sticks for too long. It's amazing that this has stuck so long and like I'm so interested in it. It started with just getting a pair of roller skates and I just went around my apartment complex for a while, and that kind of got boring because it was just like not bad. So I was like, let me go to the skate park. So why not? And then I started going to the skate park, and I think that's where it stuck because I get bored easily, but there's so many things to do at the skate park. So that was interesting. And the science and engineering part of it, for me at least, it comes from there's a new challenge every time. Like it's not one thing you learn and you're done with. There's always something new to learn. And you're always like adapting and experimenting. So if you're learning a trick, you have to tweak it till it works. So it's like the scientific method of adjusting.
What happened?
Yeah. Like, where's my center of gravity? Or like, how do I move my body to get this? And with the hardware too, there's so many things like your wheels, like there's so many different hardness levels and like the diameter that can affect speed and acceleration and all that. So all those little things tweaking, that is a lot of fun to just land one trick and then
Oh
you have to
my
go like figure
goodness.
out this all over again for something else, and you fall a lot in the process. So just
Oh my goodness, you're a huge nerd. That's so cute and so wonderful. You basically just created like your love of physics and engineering with you as the
yeah.
subject. Like you're the circuit to be like, what do I need to create that one
Yeah.
blinking like kickflip or like trick at the end of the tunnel? I need to
Yeah.
change this one component. That's so cute. And is there a trick right now that you're really working on? That's something that you're like, okay, this is like, I've seen those crazy ones when they drop in and then they do these crazy flips. Or is
Oh
that kind
yeah.
of your end goal, or where are you at right now for tricks? What are you really honing in on to be like, I need to do this, my next one?
Yeah. I'm doing a lot of, so in a half pipe, I can drop in and like
Mm.
stall on the other end and come
Oh,
back.
cool.
But I'm trying to like, while I'm coming backwards, to jump and land on the other side.
Oh my,
That's what I'm working on. I really want to do that one.
that's
And
so
then
cool.
I just want to do more like half pipe, and I like skating in bowls. It's
Mm.
fun to be parallel to the ground. So I've been trying to stay on the walls for longer.
I love that you brought up that like you get bored or you have a bunch of hobbies, because I'm the same way. There's always something new. But one thing that's stuck, and maybe it's similar to skating because it's high energy and different, is skiing and mountain biking for me. Those are my
Yeah.
two. But there's something about having a busy brain and having now a science kid brain, having that, and then all of a sudden you're like vertical or you're like falling. You can't really think about anything else. All of that leaves your brain. You're just focusing on being like, oh, I'm falling. Like I'm in the air. I'm like, I could
Yeah.
die unless I do this
Yeah.
correctly. There's something.
And I don't know if you felt this with skiing, at least for me, it made my mindset and like just my approach in general a lot better. I think I was a little bit more of a perfectionist before. Now, because I fall so much and like
Mhm.
whenever I do things, I've loosened up a little bit in the rest of my life, a little
Yes.
bit.
Yeah.
I think I'm a little more assertive in some senses, or a little bit more confident, because in the skate park it's mostly like skateboarding and
Mhm.
like mostly men, and then but you have to like take your turn and you have
Yeah.
to commit and go, because or else someone will come crash into me if I'm not like saying I'm going and I
Yeah.
go.
This is
So
my time right now. That's a really
yeah.
good call out. I've never thought of it that way of being like assertive. I always say that I become a punk because I started skiing a lot during COVID. During the work, I would leave and have a little split break in my work, and I would go ski for a couple hours. And I would put on Metallica, and I was like, all of a sudden taking air on every single like roller. Like I
Nice.
just felt like a punk kid, but it did make me like more assertive and more
Yeah.
confident in a way. But I did feel like a little punk, like 14-year-old that was like, yeah.
Same, yeah.
Yeah.
And then you feel like badass if, even
Mhm.
if you go back to work and if you have to deal with something, you're like, I already like flew, caught air, and did all this, so whatever comes my
Yeah.
way, it's fine.
I can freaking handle that circuit. No
Yeah.
biggie. What's that robot doing? I got it. I'm doing this
Yeah.
cool stall trick. That's so beautiful that you fell in love with this. I have one last question. And
Yeah.
this might be like the biggest question that I've asked. So please take your time with it because it's right at the end. I don't know why I put it at the end, but it was about this huge event in your life when you immigrated from India to the United States to
Yeah.
pursue your education and then this career. And I was wondering if you could speak to this experience because I'm sure there was so many highs, there was a lot of lows. And then if anybody's listening and they're going through the same thing and maybe they're in one of those low bits or like one of those rough bits, what would be your advice to them if they were going through the same situation?
I was like barely 20 when I moved, so that
Oh,
helped a lot.
wow.
Like my best friend delusion was on my side. I could handle it. So I was really excited to move to another country just because there weren't a lot of opportunities for me
Mm.
in India, because I wanted to do more practical things and work in like some of the companies that I'm working in. I wanted those opportunities for myself. So I was really excited about that. I did my undergrad and was giving all the exams needed, like the entrance exams, to do my master's at the same time. So I was too busy to pause at that moment to think.
Yeah.
So the first time it hit me was like when I came here. So the first night, like none of my roommates had moved in, and I walked in and like my landlord let me in the apartment and no one else was there, and I didn't think there would be. I thought there would be furniture, which I didn't anticipate. So he was like, "Oh no, you don't have anything." So he got me a blanket and like
Oh,
there was like a pillow, and I slept on the floor that day, which was like funny to think about. But like
yeah.
that first night, because no one was there, and I was like, if something happens, no one will know. So that was a little anxiety inducing. And my solution to that was to watch a lot of like true crime stuff.
Oh, I
to,
love that. Yeah, to help you calm down, to be like Criminal Minds and like watching
yeah.
violent murders. I do the same
hmm
thing. There's something about it that helps. Yeah.
Yeah, it's comforting. I'd be like, they'll find them. If they don't they dare, if they dare, they'll find them. So that's how I tackled that. Don't advise it, but that's how I did it. I guess one thing that I did do was I went and I found like people to meet. Like I'm not an extrovert, but I forced myself to be an extrovert to find like a community, which was helpful. And I deliberately made a decision when I was moving here because there are a lot of Indians who moved to the US, and there was like a community, not just stick with the people I know. I tried to integrate with like other people because it's always like a new experience and there's
Yeah.
uncomfortability, but I leaned into the uncomfortability. And my roommates at the time were like all over the world, and there was a lot of things to figure out, and I was okay with that. I guess that would be my advice. If people are moving somewhere or trying to do something new, don't try to
Force
be
it.
too comfortable. Don't, because I think like we try to bring some of home with us for comfort reasons, which is totally fine. But also, you're here to expand yourselves, be a little more flexible and lean into that.
I think it's wonderful advice of just being like, it's hard advice of being like, get comfortable being uncomfortable, because that's a scary new thing and you're in this new place. And I couldn't imagine that level of change and that first night of being like, oh my goodness, it's actually real. That shock. I couldn't imagine living through that. Wonderful advice of how to handle the bad days and that you're going to get through it. And there's going to be a lot of good days. It sounds like if you would redo it, you would do it again, which is the best thing to hope for of making a really big, scary change and scary life decision. If you would redo it and live through it again, I feel like that speaks to how many good days there were versus bad days.
For sure. And I think like a lot of people who move for change and to grow and expand. So yeah, like don't be comfortable because of that, because you don't want that. You want change.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you. It was so nice connecting with you and chatting and learning about circuits and learning about you and clean technology and all these volunteering aspects, and just it was everything.
Thank you so much. This was amazing. Thank you.
This has been the Smoko Podcast. Ayesha, it was wonderful talking to you. Thank you again. And for people listening, we will see you next Wednesday for another episode of the Smoko Podcast. And that is all for now. Ta-ta for now. I still can't believe that you've never said circuit or circus instead of circuit. Like, I have said it so many times. I can't believe that's never happened to you. Is it not common? Has no one ever said that?
I don't think anyone's ever said that.
when I was practicing, I was like, obviously she's heard that before. Like, people probably mess up all the time and say circus. But no,